Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Jalen and today I have a quick little Sunday reads for you. So, I wanted to talk about some recent reads that I've read and some books that I'm currently reading, coming up on the TBR. You know the drill with these Sunday reads. And before we get into it, I am drinking a gin martini. Getting a little bougie on the channel. Just kidding, but I had a martini at dinner the other night and I was like, what if I get into a little like Bombay Sapphire gin moment? At home, you know, have a nice cocktail I read instead of my usual like beer and wine. That's like my go-to is any context, usually beer and wine, but a little cocktail moment. But yeah, so what's going on? I will say my reading has been, I don't think it's been slow, but I'm reading a longer book. I'm doing some author interviews, trying to plan some more of those coming up soon. I think I've said this on my channel, but I cannot believe that authors are actually coming on my channel to be interviewed. It's shocking, and I had a publisher recently send me a book, a new release, and on the note that she wrote, she said maybe we could do like a short interview with the author if you might be interested in that. And I'm like, wait, how does she know that I do interviews? Like, I don't know, I think it's becoming a little bit of a thing, hopefully. I really want to keep it going, and I can't tell you how happy I am about it. Like, I'm so, like, doing them and preparing for them and talking to authors and just having them take the time to chat with me about books is something that I'm finding, like, immense joy from, and I really hope to make it into a further regular thing on my channel because I haven't really seen too many similar like video discussion series on YouTube where it's author interviews exclusively. That's just like one booktuber doing it. And so I hope I can fill that niche on here. But I have been thinking about the idea of uploading the audio from my interviews onto podcasting platforms. And so if that's something that you're interested in, please let me know, because I know people that don't have YouTube Premium and you're on your phone, if you close out of the app, you can't listen anymore. So I don't know if that's like a big group of people that listen to the podcast that way. I know not even everyone that subscribes to me listens to it, but let me know your thoughts on that, because I would definitely upload them to podcasting apps and make it like a true podcast while keeping the video discussion series going on my channel for people that want to watch me talking to people. But aside from that, since my last wrap up, I've read 4 books, so that's nice. It's a little mid-month catch up. The first one I read is this little horror novel that fucked me right up. It's called Anybody Home by Michael Seidlinger. I don't know how to pronounce his last name. I should have looked this up beforehand. But essentially, this book is out from Clash Books in August 16th of 2022. And if you like, I don't know if like is the right word, but if you partake in home invasion horror, i.e. The Strangers, Scream, that kind of thing, this book should immediately go. Oh, and Funny Games is another movie. This book should go on your TBR. This is such a terrifying examination of home invasion and the reasonings for people doing it. So this book is told in the second person perspective, and so essentially you're placed in the shoes of a person committing a home invasion, and this sort of like master or seasoned invader who has multiple home invasions under their belt kind of gives you tips on how you should be doing it properly, and we follow this home invasion from beginning to end. And when I tell you, I did not I knew what was coming, and when you're reading this book you feel the immense dread throughout the entire thing of like knowing what this home invader is going to do, and you learn kind of how they go about doing this in the various ways that they have to get into this family's house and how they think about certain things, how they hack into certain information and understand things about the family dynamic in order to get at the core of the problems within the family in order to invade their home and enact violence against them, was so terrifying to read and makes me not trust anyone that I ever meet. So if you're afraid of like being home alone or afraid of other people, if you have general fears about this, I do, and I like to tap into those fears through like reading and watching movies and stuff, but this one will get under your skin. Like, unquestionably horrifying, but it's also really interestingly told through this second person narration style and strong writing as well. I will say that some of the narration gets kind of confusing in terms of trying to picture what's going on. There's this, I don't know if motif is the right word, but this idea of like what the camera is seeing. So like taking camera footage of like what's going on in the home invasion. Some of that language in here was kind of confusing, but aside from that, I really, really enjoyed this. Dark and depraved. Scariest book I've read so far this year, like messed up. But if that sounds good to you, definitely try it. And then completely on a different wavelength is Little Rabbit by Alyssa, trend of me not knowing how to pronounce last names, Song Siridage. This is a book that's right in the niche of books that I love, namely those about what seem to be kind of obsessive love situations. So this one follows a 30-something woman, and she meets this choreographer who's at this artist residency in Maine, and she's a writer, and you eventually learn that post-residency, she gets an opportunity, I think, to go see his work, and they meet again, and they engage in this really intense relationship between the two of them that kind of has this gradually becomes like a BDSM relationship. And what's really interesting about this book is that the narrator, she is a queer woman, and she lives with a roommate who is also queer. And when she gets into this hetero relationship with this man who's much older than her, I think about 20 years older, the friend who she's rooming with, as I mentioned, gets a little bit, she questions the dynamic and wonders why her as a queer woman, she's dabbling in this like cis heteronormative relationship. And so I thought that was a really interesting perspective in terms of how choosing a certain relationship with someone can affect friendships, like what loyalties we have towards friends versus when they're kind of encroaching on our own autonomy and our own decisions in relationships, and the differences between there is really interesting. This book is also about art and dancing and creating through writing, and the struggles that the narrator has with that in the midst of this relationship that starts to become quite she subsumes herself in it. Yeah, if you love very like interior a la Sally Rooney, the book Acts of Service, which is my book club pick this month. If you like that book, if you love, very deep, intimate, sexy time novels, this is a good one. Really liked it. I also, the other night, just finished The Trouble with Happiness by Tove Ditlevsen. It's a short story collection that I feel like is a really good pairing with her memoir trilogy that came out last year that was quite buzzy. These stories essentially look at the ills of domesticity in marriage, and it really is a deep look at Tove Ditlevsen's preoccupations with family and marriage and autonomy. And in her own life, she sought to be a poet and writer, and the struggles that she had in Copenhagen at this time as a woman, getting that while also suffering from depression and anxiety. And so these stories take a third-person perspective and really examine these questions of domesticity and the quite bleak circumstances that her characters find themselves in, and how she examines those in this very brief, almost flash fiction at time format. I think it's a really good pairing to go with the Copenhagen trilogy to kind of get a full understanding of Tove Ditlevsen's inner preoccupations and, thoughts on these topics. I think she's a really excellent writer. I will say that some of these stories tend to feel quite repetitive and quite samey in terms of the similar family dynamics that are set up. And aside from that, though, I think it's sort of intentional in how this repetitive cycle of domesticity is examined through these very similar stories, but each one does dabble in something a little bit different. So if you like the Copenhagen trilogy, definitely try this out. And finally, I read a really stunning memoir called Easy Beauty by Chloe Cooper Jones. She's a Pulitzer Prize finalist and a philosophy professor, and this is essentially her on the page thinking about certain periods in her life. It's also sort of like this travel memoir of her experiences traveling, while also reflecting on many things involving philosophy and this idea of beauty throughout the entire thing. And a key underpinning here is her experiences with disability, and that's sort of the foundation at the start of this memoir in terms of she's at a bar with two friends who start questioning in this conversation with her whether she should have been born due to her having this disability. And so that is a sort of through line here in terms of her examining disability in her family dynamic, her having a son, which she didn't think that she could have given her disability, and how she thinks about philosophy that underpins all of these things as she's traveling and reflecting on her life and the meaning of life through various concepts of beauty from various philosophers, and how she teaches it in her classes. I'll have more thoughts on this by the end of the month, but I think this is about family and finding purpose in your life when people don't think that you should be alive, for one thing, and also this idea of accessibility and this dichotomy between interior self and external forces on your life, namely when you have a disability and the various things that comes with. I think this is gorgeous, stunning. I love philosophical books, and so I love that she used this idea of beauty as a through line to examine her entire life on the page. Very, very good. And finally, I'll just go into a couple books that I am currently reading, and then two books that I'm eyeing right now. So these two are Mating by Norman Rush and The Netanyahus by Joshua Cohen. So I'll start with Mating by Norman Rush. So this book actually came recommended to me from one Rebecca Eats Books. She read this recently, but also this is a key influence for my favorite book of 2021, Fake Accounts by Lauren Euler, and she was talking about this book on Twitter, and so like those two things together made me want to pick this book up. This is a long one. It's quite a pretentious and dense literary fiction novel, but I'm really enjoying my time with it. And it's really interesting that this is written by a man, but this is essentially like a DWM moving through South Africa. And so this one, we follow an American anthropologist, and she sort of has a failed thesis while she's there. She's incredibly intellectual and smart, very like witty and snarky, a la the narrator of Fake Accounts by Lone Euler. Is essentially this love story in which she meets this man named Nelson Denoon. And he's rumored to have started this sort of utopian society that's essentially run by women, and he's the only man, but he's the one that sort of orchestrates it. And so we learn about her exploring through Africa, thinking about deeply intellectually about anthropology and her own pursuit of academia, while also meeting this man and becoming quite enraptured with him and wanting to learn more about him in this utopia. And right now I think I'm about halfway through it, and she's just getting to this utopia. And I think it's a really interesting look at academia in the 80s. I believe this is set in the 80s. And understanding how Norman Rush as a man wrote this from like a woman's perspective and made this really deeply, flawed and sort of complex female narrator and inhabiting her mind. And I guess this book is really inspired by his wife. And so, yeah, it's a really vocab rich. I highly recommend doing this on Kindle so you can look up words as you go through it. But if you like the sort of like biting, incisive narrator of contemporary literature, but you want it in a different geographical location and a weird sort of setup of like a love story, but also this idea of a feminine utopia that's created by a man in this time. I'll have full thoughts when I finish this, but it's an interesting one. And it's really good on audio as well. And then I finally started The Netanyahus by Joshua Cohen. This one just won the Pulitzer Prize for fiction this week. This has been on my radar for a while, but I will say I was kind of put off by this one because of my lack of historical understanding of Judaism generally. But my partner, he is Jewish, and he's sort of put me on to certain like Jewish humor, i.e. through like watching Seinfeld and like Curb Your Enthusiasm and just his own like family stories. And so upon reading this, essentially, we follow Reuben Bloom, who I believe is based on Harold Bloom, and he is a Jewish historian, but not a historian about Judaism, but he's about America, but he's Jewish. And essentially, he's hired onto this committee to hire the exiled Israeli scholar Netanyahu. This book is similarly to Mating quite pretentious. I feel like that's the wrong word. They're very brainy and snarky and intellectual, and I really find that I'm enjoying my experience reading them. And this book is actually quite accessible and approachable in its sort of historical critique and examination of these topics, and it also has a quite like a rompy family drama thing going on right now in the book. I'm about 80 pages in, so I don't have any strong thoughts, but he's received like 2 letters of recommendation for Netanyahu, one which says he should hire him and one who says he should not. So it's this blend of like fiction and nonfiction with like a family dramedy. I'm really digging it. I'm like actually loving it. It's so propulsive and kind of unputdownable. So I'm excited to get into this one tonight actually. So lots to come. And then finally, 2 books that are on my radar that I really want to pick up soon. This one I think I'm definitely picking up next is Trust by Hernan Diaz. He's a Pulitzer Prize finalist for the book In the Distant, which lately, like in the last like 6 months, I've seen so many people love that like read backlist. I've just seen it's like excellent novel. And this one, what I know about it is it's about the 1920s and this idea of like money and power and corruption, but it's told in 4 different novels, but they all kind of come together. So it's like 4 different perspectives, I think, on the same events that sort of reveals itself throughout the book through the 4 different novels or tellings from different narrators that all kind of comes together in a really brilliant way. I've only seen like wildly incredible rave reviews of this book, so I'm very curious to see where I'm going to stand on it, but it seems right up my alley, and I feel like this one could surprise me by how much I love it, so we'll let you know what I think. And then finally I have Disorientation by Elaine Chu. This one I've seen also kind of going around. All I know about this one is it's a campus novel that is sort of a satire in a sense, and actually I just interviewed Lillian Fishman, author of Acts of Service, and I asked her for a book that she recently read and loved, and she recommended this one. And so she said that in that interview that I had with her, she mentioned that she thinks that this book is doing similar things in terms of structure and thematically, but while her book is looking at sexual orientation, this one is using a similar thing, this idea of disorientation, but from the perspective of race. And so I'm really intrigued to see those through lines between the 2. Debut novel, I love the cover, and has high praise, so we'll see. One other book that I'm really intrigued to pick up, it's a backlist book, but it's Fates and Furies by Lauren Groff. My friend Hunter at Shelf by Shelf on Instagram, this is his favorite book of all time, I believe. In his review of Trust by Hernan Diaz, he compared it to Fates and Furies, and he always tells me to read this book. I know it's about a marriage that sort of reveals itself throughout the narrative, certain fraught aspects of it. So if you read this, let me know. I really liked her book Matrix, so I'm curious to see a less historical leaning novel, and I think a marriage novel will be a good one for me to read next from her. And I also picked up 2 novels, one just because it's gorgeous. It's The Hours by Michael Cunningham. I'll hold it up here. It has a stunning gold foil, and I know this book I believe is a modern classic. I don't even know what it's about, but I've heard of it. But this book just came out in a new edition that also has Virginia Woolf's Mrs. Dalloway in the back of it, because I guess The Hours is highly influenced by Mrs. Dalloway. I just am obsessed with this deckled edged, controversial I know, French flapped new issue in this sort of like creamy floral gold foiled edition. Stunning. Bought it for the cover alone. And then finally, I have this book called Two Serious Ladies by Jane Bowles. This is another one that is quite older. I think this is from the 50s. I recently looked up Sheila Heti's favorite books, and this came in at number 2 on her list. Number 1 was The Picture of Dorian Gray, which I read and adored, so now I want to go through more of her recommendations because she's one of my favorite writers, and so I think I'm gonna love this. I think it's about like 2 friends and like coming together and apart throughout their lives, and it's sort of like darkly funny, I believe. And I guess Jane Bowles, I think this is the only novel she ever wrote, and she kind of went into hiding or something, sort of like a reclusive, elusive writer, so full thoughts to come. But yeah, that is my update on reading. In case you do not know, my book club pick this month is Acts of Service by Lillian Fishman, and I'll be joined by CJ at CJ Reads Thursday, May 26th at 5 p.m. Pacific for a live stream to talk all about it. We'll be getting into spoilers, full dive into the book. There's still time to read it. It's quite a slim little read. Upon thinking about it a little bit more, I think it might be my favorite book of this year. Like, I can't stop thinking about that book. It's so goddamn good. Please read it and join us this month. It's going to be a great discussion, and I really think many of you will love the book. Let me know what you're reading. How is your reading month going for the month of May? What's your favorite book so far this year? Please let me know. If you have any thoughts on any of the books that I mentioned, I would love to chat with you in the comments, and I will catch you all in the next one. Bye.